Hey guys, welcome to Chapter 12, GDP and growth. Before we talk about how GDP grows, let's recall what exactly GDP is. Remember, GDP is a measure of things, of products. So here's a really cool picture. I have a sequence of three neat pictures showing three different families that are at the average GDP per capita for each country, and then all of the products that their GDP per capita can buy. So here's this first country. It is England, United Kingdom, and you see they are considered a high income family because they have $36,000 GDP per capita. Low child mortality rate, 0.5%. That's the number of children who die before they get to 5 years old, and a very high high school enrollment. Notice they have a lot of neat things. A sailboat over here. I don't know. A couple TVs, car. Some very nice goods. Let's go to a middle income family in Mexico. We have 15,000 their GDP is per capita. Still low child mortality rate, but it's higher, and then of course a lower high school enrollment. They also have fewer things, right? So hopefully we're seeing the idea here that as your GDP per capita goes down, so do your possessions. Check out this country. This is Mali. A poor country, GDP per capita of 1,040, child mortality rate 17.6%. That's astonishing, and a high school enrollment rate of only 31%. And look, their entire household possessions consists of sticks and a couple of pots. Okay, so here's basically the same exact idea here, but I'm just going to show it for more countries and not in such a cool way. So we have the first fact: there are vast differences in living standards around the world, and we have the second fact that the growth rate of the GDP per capita across the world changes. So don't forget that because of the circular flow model, the GDP per capita right here of any one country, so of China, $9,233 per capita, that means per person how much product do they make? $9,233. That means also per person how much do they gain for income? $9,233, right? The production and income numbers are the same on average. That's what GDP per capita can tell us. Okay, so we really want these numbers, these GDP per capita numbers, to grow, the numbers in this column right here. So we're very interested in their growth rate. And you see some of these countries, China has an extremely high growth rate, Singapore has an extremely high growth rate, and then unfortunately there's countries down here like Chad that has not only a low level of GDP but also a low growth rate. All right, so let's think about how the country rankings can change over time due to growth rates, right? Poor countries, i.e. Singapore in the 1960s, it was poor, but now it's quite high. It's 61,000 GDP. It's actually higher than the United States because it's had a very fast rate of growth between now and then. Rich countries won't stay rich forever if they become overtaken by the faster growing countries. And so here's some questions. Why are some countries richer than others? Why do some countries grow quickly, like others seem stuck in a poverty trap? And what policies can help raise growth rates and long-run living standards? This is really what we're very interested in. What can the government do? What policies in order to grow the GDP per capita in the future? And then that will mean in the long run, people will have higher living standards. So the number one determinant for a country's standard of living is its ability to produce goods and services. Remember, that's one of our principles. And so this ability depends on the productivity, or how much product each person in the economy can make. How do we measure that? Well, since Y is the real GDP, the total number of product made, L is the number of laborers, productivity is very simply Y over L, which is just the GDP divided by the number of people. This just becomes one number, and it is just the amount of production that one worker makes, or the number of products that one worker makes. That's what Y over L is. All right. Why is this important? Well, this makes sense. When all of the workers are very productive, meaning they all have high Y over L's, GDP is big and incomes are high. When productivity, Y over L, grows rapidly, living conditions go up. So let's ask, what determines the Y over L, this productivity, and what determines how fast it grows? Here's the first idea. Physical capital per worker, right? The amount of inputs that are of a mechanical form or like our structures, our tractors that are used to produce the goods and services, we'll call that physical capital. It's denoted K. I have physical in brackets here because sometimes we refer to it just as plain old capital, but right now I want you to understand that I'm talking about actual physical capital like machines or computers or something like that. So we'll call that big K. Now big K is the total number of machines in the dollar value of total number of machines in the economy. When I look at how many machines per person, per worker, it's just K over L. I just divide by the number of workers and I get the number of machines each worker has. So when K over L goes up, that means Y over L goes up. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Here's another thing that tends to influence how much people produce is their human capital. So this is knowledge and skills workers acquire through education, training, experiences, on-the-job training. This is maybe educational training at a school, at a formal place. This is just experience from working for a long time. Big H is the total amount of human capital. This is really hard to measure, right? Total amount of human capital in the economy. H over L is how much each average worker has. Now this makes sense. When H over L goes up, meaning when each worker has more human capital, that's what that's telling us there. Each worker has more production. That's what that's telling us there. Okay, and finally, as far as the per worker pieces, the natural resources per worker. So we call big N all the inputs into production that nature itself provides. So land, mineral deposits, coal, perhaps something like that. And if a country has more N, more natural deposits, then a country can produce more Y. So let's put that in the per worker terms, right? If N over L goes up, this is just how much, right, natural resources divided by the number of people, the number of workers, how much natural resources each laborer gets to use means each laborer's output is also going to go up. So some countries are rich, they have a lot of natural resources, Saudi Arabia. Some countries import a lot of N, and like for example Japan. And then finally, there's this other thing that's technological knowledge, and it's society's understanding of the way to produce goods and services. So this has a difference in how much production each individual makes. The first thing to note is that technological progress, it doesn't have to have anything to do with technology as we think of it. It doesn't have to have anything to do with computers or stuff like that. Basically, we write it with an A, and it means any advance in knowledge that boosts productivity. So here's a good example. Henry Ford and the assembly line. Henry Ford had this assembly line of workers, and some of them screwed on the doors, and some of them put on the tires, and then the car went down the assembly line. He realized that if he just switched the positions of like two of the guys, maybe the guy who screwed on the door handles and the guy who screws on the doors, he just switched the position of them, the whole assembly line went faster, right? So Y over L went up, and nothing else changed as far as the other per capita things. There was no increase in K over L or H over L or N over L. So there's this last thing, it's A, and A must have increased. That we call it a technological increase, a technological progress when he just switches the places of a couple of guys. Okay, so what's the difference between technological knowledge and human capital? Well, technological knowledge is basically something all of society kind of has in general, knowledge to produce goods and services, right? Once Henry Ford switches those guys around, then every other assembly line can copy and follow suit. But human capital is something on an individual level. Human capital results from people going to school. So each individual worker in his assembly line would have to go to school. That would be an increase in human capital. So they're both, though, very important for productivity, but quite different. All right, so we're going to draw this thing called the production function. It's just a mathematical formula to describe the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. And it looks like this, where Y is the GDP, F is a function, and then A is the level of technology. I want to point out a couple of things here. You notice, so that's full GDP, this is technology, and this is the function. Remember in math class when maybe you saw your math teacher write something like this, f of x equals 3x. This is basically all that we're doing here. We're just writing the f of x part, which is this part right here. And the reason is because we don't actually know this side it's too complicated for the economy as a whole. We just know that there is some function, and that it takes as inputs L, K, H, and N. Another way that I sometimes think about it is there's this factory, right? It's right here, and there's a little smoke coming out of the top, and in is coming L, right? L is coming in. You can see that. You can see that K is going in. You can see that H is going in. You can see that N is going in, right? And it enters the doors, and then out pops the output Y. Now, we don't know exactly what's going on inside this factory. We just know it's some function process, so we're going to put F of blank. And the blank is labor, capital, human resources, and natural resources. Okay? That's kind of the way I think about it. One thing I do know about this production function, and it's very simple, is that if it has constant returns to scale, which means that if I double all inputs, it will cause outputs to double, right? So if I have 2 times as much labor, 2 times as much capital, 2 times as much human capital, and 2 times as much natural resources, my output will be twice as much. So remember from the factory that we were talking about before, we saw the L and the K and the H and the N come in here. Basically what I'm proposing is building an identical factory right next to it with the same amount of L, K, H, and N going in, and it will also have Y going out. So in total, I will be getting 2Y of output. So that's basically how that's what this is saying. Notice that my A does not have to double because it's the same technology going on in here and in here. A technological improvement, remember, would be just perhaps trading places for guys that are in here. And so same technology, double all of the inputs, and we have double output. Okay. The same token, we can increase by 10%, or that's like multiplying by 1.1, and we have output also increasing by 1.1. Okay, so why do we do this? Well, I'm going to pull a trick right here. I'm going to multiply each input by 1 over L, right? So why am I going to divide each input by L, meaning multiply by 1 over L? Well, because I'm actually interested in the remember the capital per labor, and the human resources per labor, and the natural resources per laborer. I don't really care about the overall number quite so much. So when I go ahead and divide everything by L, this puts everything in per worker terms. See, capital per worker, human capital per worker, and natural resources per worker. And we know that and of course this was L over L, so that becomes 1. We know that when we multiply all of these by 1 over L, we have to multiply this by 1 over L. And look what it ends up being, Y over L. That's actually what we're trying to measure, productivity. We've already previously defined that as productivity. So this very cool production function shows that the productivity, or output per worker, right, Y over L, depends on these 4 things: A, K over L, H over L, and N over L. If I want to create a policy that improves productivity, and why do I want to do that? Because that is the #1 way to increase living standards. I have to focus on K over L, H over L, and N over L. Okay, does that make sense? Let's talk about this in actual policies. Right, I want you to just take for a second, pause this, and think about which of these might be the best way to boost growth and living standards, and then I will go over them. All right, welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and go through these one at a time by looking at how to change what public policy can affect, how it can affect Y over L. So the first thing, we know that if we can increase K, it will help K over L go up, which will make Y over L go up, right? Well, in order to increase K, you have to have investment. You have to invest in more capital, more tractors, more computers, more capital, whatever it is. And since these resources are not infinite, if I save more today, meaning if I invest more today, I cannot eat as much consumption goods today also, right? So my level of consumption goods has to go down today so that I can save for the end of the year, so I can buy new capital equipment so my K can go up, right? So reducing consumption is the same as increasing saving in our model, and increasing saving means that K goes up and K over L goes up, and then Y over L goes up. Okay, so that's how I get the production of investment goods, right? So there's a current trade-off between current and future consumption. All right, this is very cool because as K will rise, then K over L will rise and Y over L will rise. But it doesn't happen forever. There's this thing called diminishing returns to capital. Now let me show you what this looks like. Because when I put this on the graph, right, look at the axes, output per worker and capital per worker. Because it's not a straight line, meaning that down here, capital helps a lot, but over here, the slope is close to 0. Adding extra capital doesn't help as much. The growth in Y over L due to K over L cannot happen forever, right? If they only have one shovel and you give them another shovel, that's K over L, their Y over L goes up a bunch. But if they already have a ton of shovels, a ton of K over L, and you give them another shovel, the increase in productivity is very small, right? So this is kind of an example of perhaps like a rich country up here, and this is an example of a poorer country that's growing faster. Because these poorer countries grow faster, there's this thing called the catch-up effect. And basically, it's just what we saw. A poor country starts here and a rich country starts there. They both have the same increase in their K over L, but the poor country's growth is very much bigger than the rich country's growth. Now, the poor country's growth won't grow this much forever. Once it starts catching up and gets up here, then it will also grow slowly as well. Okay, so here's an example. United States and South Korea from 1960 to 1990 devote about the same amount to GDP to investment, but the growth was much more in Korea than in the United States. That's because K over L was smaller in Korea. So I can raise K over L from abroad via foreign direct investment or foreign portfolio investment. One is direct investment is actually building a factory. Foreign portfolio investment is sending money to build a factory. All right. Yes, some of the returns from these investments flow back to the foreign countries, but it's the countries that receive the money still get higher K over L than they would by doing nothing. Okay. So these poor countries that can't get started, that can't really grow enough K over L on their own, can be helped a lot by foreign dollars. Okay, education, right? If government can increase H, which will increase H over L, which will increase Y over L. So how can the government do that? Public schools, subsidized loans for college. In the United States, it's been estimated that each year of schooling, right, each year that H over L goes up, that Y over L can go up by 10%, right? Because a worker's wage is equal to how much he makes. So if Y over L goes up by 10%, his wage will go up by 10%. This also has a trade-off, right? If I want to go to school now and increase my human capital now, that means I have to stop consuming right now because I'll have higher consumption in the future. Health and nutrition, this is a subset of human capital, right? Healthier workers are more productive. So if you are in a country with significant malnourishment, just giving the workers more food, really simple, easy way to increase their H over L raises productivity. South Korea, over the time period we talked about, when it grew a lot and outpaced the United States, the caloric consumption rose by 44%, meaning they ate 44% more food. Robert Fogel, Nobel Prize winner, said that 30% of Great Britain's growth over a nearly 200-year period here was due to improved nutrition. All right, and also, here's an important thing to think about. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity, but you need someone to protect their property rights, right? It's unlikely that if I'm in a poor country and the justice system doesn't work very well and contracts aren't not enforced, there's fraud, or firms are having to bribe government officials for permits to build something, it's unlikely that the firms will invest in K over L. K over L will be too small, because if they do try to invest in more capital and build more buildings, then if the government or thieves or someone takes that away from them, then they will have lost all that money. So people just don't invest in K at all in these kind of countries. All right, so political instability creates uncertainty over whether property rights will be protected in the future, and therefore people don't build. Okay, when people fear that any of their capital, their K, is going to be stolen by criminals or taken from the government, and there's less investment, that means K over L goes down. That means lower living standards. So it's really important to have a properly functioning judicial system and a government. All right, economic stability, efficiency, and healthy growth require these things I was just talking about. They require law enforcement, effective courts, a stable constitution, and honest government officials. All right, trade. Should we have inward-oriented policies, meaning we're going to try to prevent investment from abroad, or we're going to have outward-oriented policies, meaning we're going to go ahead and allow foreign companies to come in and trade with us and build factories on our soil, right? Trade can make everyone better off. It also has another way of improving life, is that when countries trade, they can learn some of their technology, and that can be an increase in A, right, in technological progress. So if A goes up and K over L goes up because these foreign countries are coming in and doing foreign direct investment, then Y over L will go up a lot, right? So this is why countries with inward-oriented policies, meaning restriction on foreign countries and foreign firms, have generally failed to create growth, right? Argentina during the 20th century did not grow quite much at all. It pursued isolationist policies. But outward-oriented policies, countries that have these, have often succeeded, right? There's the idea of South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, all these things, these three countries known as the Asian Tigers after 1960. Now, in order to make Y over L go up in the long run, right? Because if I make K over L or H over L or N over L go up, eventually there's diminishing marginal returns. They can only increase it so much. But if you remember, A didn't have that problem. A was outside of the function. In other words, A can keep going up forever. And it's estimated that the main reason why Y over L rises in the long run, especially in rich countries, is technological progress, meaning A is going up. One reason is that knowledge is a public good, right? Once that one person invents something that helps the technological progress, that helps the production function, then everyone else can use it. Okay, so the government really tries to promote technological progress. It has patent laws that allow people who invent something new to be rewarded by being able to sell it as a monopoly for a couple of years. And they also have tax incentives, meaning if a company decides to try to have research and development, every dollar they spend on that, perhaps they don't have to spend taxes on, or something like that. And also there's grants for research at universities. So finally, population growth, L, actually. It may affect living standards, and it's unclear exactly how it helps it or hurts it. Because remember, it enters in the bottom of all of the variables in the production function, right? So when L goes up, N over L goes down. In other words, natural resources get spread out, right? There was a philosopher, Thomas Malthus. He argued that population growth would strain society's ability to provide for itself. However, population has grown a bunch, and if he was right about that, then GDPs would have fallen, but they've risen. He forgot to account for the fact that the technological progress, the A, is going up at all times. So another thing that happens when L goes up, both H over L and K over L goes up, right? And so there's lower productivity and living standards from that, right? And it's true that countries with fast population growth tend to have lower educational attainment. Many countries actually have population growth control laws, right? Because they think that this is happening. However, there's a third way that when there's more people, you have more scientists, more discoveries, faster technological progress, and A goes up more. So it's unclear really what population growth does to Y over L. Michael Kremer thinks that growth rates have increased actually as the world's population increased, and more populated regions grew faster than less populated ones, right? So this is evidence that increased labor, that making L go higher, actually makes Y over L go up also. All right, so just take a second and list the determinants of productivity and list 3 policies that attempt to raise living standards by increasing one of the determinants of productivity. All right, welcome back. So the determinants are these right here, right? The things that change Y over L is K over L, H over L, N over L, and A. And so here's some policies, just some ideas. Encourage savings and investment, which raises K over L. Encourage investment from abroad, or foreign direct investment, raises K over L. If you provide public education, that rises H over L, right? If you have patent laws, it increases A. If you control population growth, then that's going to increase K over L and N over L and H over L, right? If your L goes down. All right, so the question is, are natural resources a limit to growth? Many people think that we're going to run out of natural resources, but often what happens is that things start to get expensive and then we switch using technological progress. So hybrid cars use less gas, better insulation to cool homes. And really what happens is as the resource becomes more scarce, it becomes expensive, and then everybody switches to something else instead of running out. So the idea here in conclusion is the long run, living standards are determined by productivity. Policies that affect the determinants of productivity, right? The determinants are A, H over L, K over L, and N over L, will affect the next generation's living standards. It's really important. And finally, one of the important ways to increase Y over L is to increase K over L through savings and investment, and we'll talk about that next chapter.